Music is the painting of the human psychology. It is truly speaking directly to our senses, to our subconscious, to our imagination, to our fears, to our fantasies, to our hopes. It can drill deeper sorrow. It can uplift spiritually from solace to hope. And it's not reflecting only the world's events or the historic events. I think it's a narrative of the human soul, or how the human soul is the mirror of the inner world, which mirrors the outer world. After all, it's the filter of our psyche that rejects or welcomes, attracts, or is distracted in the sense of even rejecting things, situations, thoughts, feelings, moods, organizations of ways of doing things, greed, hope, suspended expectations, disappointment, sorrow, loss of purpose, meaning. Musical form gives meaning. And then there is inside the meaning a narrative storytelling that touches us. So the question that really occurs when you teach it, when you perform it, when you think it, when you organize it, when you structure it into stylistic time frames, into expressive, emotional, or intellectual approaches of the textures of the polyphony or the monophony, or the tonality or the post-tonality or the modality or the folklore that is involved, as well as the savant music that is impacting, as well as the simple perfume of a melody that sticks with you. You don't know why, but has this capacity to remain with you. You whistle it when you get out from having heard it from the hall or from a performance, and not other things. Perhaps a harmonic progression is more intellectual. Perhaps it is in some cases sensual, like in Debussy, in Fauré, in Mahler, in Schubert. It is the coating of the storytelling, but there is a form that brings a purpose, and then the meaning is lost in front of the subjectivity of beauty and what we attribute it to, the levels of meaning that it reaches for us. After all, you can also change mind through your life, saying, I used to hate this, now I like that. In art, in painting, in film, in games, in fiction, in biography, in storytelling, in archaeology, in time periods. Life is, in fact, too short for too many elements of curiosity which people our inner worlds, either through philosophy and then ideologies and then comparisons with faiths and religious organizations and their evolution through millennia, then language and its evolution as human connection between evaluating or calculating or trading or then thinking or then exchanging thoughts or then creating mirrors of life through theater plays or storytellings and music, storytelling of religion, storytelling of good and evil, storytelling of our lives, sorrows and joys, as well as our capacity to think outside of the box, like cosmologists do and physicists do, and try to enter in a way where you can observe the vibration of the sounds and the resonances and how they interact between the natural harmonics and the artificial ones, and what is a sound wave and what can be combined with artificial sounds electronically, how we can reflect the rest, the silence, the depth of our reflection with the exuberance of our statements, of our beings, of our exulting livelihood. After all, we are attracted, distracted, and then we are overwhelmed, and then at some point we just cannot take it. Too much of pressure, too much of excitement, too much of curiosity, the infinity of the universe, or apparently so, scares us because it frightens us, because we cannot grasp it, imagine it, dream it, let less understand it. And artworks are made to, in fact, interact with our inner questions about the essential questions: why, what, and how long. Relativity of time, relativity of expectations, drive, animalistic drive, and then intellectual structural organization of society, of music, of dance, of reflection. In other words, music is the soundtrack of our inner world and also reflecting our outer world within the time periods and the cultures and the geographic events that form here and there, and a transhumance of people from one continent to another at some geological time periods, and then how all these genome evolution goes also with the culture that we carry, because beyond the metabolism, we are soulful beings. Not that anybody can determine exactly what it is and how it's transmitted or how it survives or evolves or recycles. Everybody has their opinion and their belief, which brings them their solace, and I'm included in them. So music can be a solace for all these questions. But if we go down to very simple daily usage of life's pleasures of the palate, when you eat or drink, or you breathe the air you breathe, and the taste of foods, the tastes of water, the tastes of essential things, the taste of a smile that looks at you without anything else to do but just politeness, not necessarily involving anything. We live at so many levels, so many emotions in daily life, and I find that a lot of them are captured in a capsule that is a music piece that translates this kind of I was gonna say tragic or tragicomic life experience, from the silly to the dramatic, from sometimes touching each other, the silly and the dramatic, so much The irony can be close to the tenderness, and the tenderness can be close to the naivete and to the goodness, which is not a weakness, though in competitive worlds with manipulative minds, it is considered so. After all, hierarchies are there for those who have and those who don't, for those who rule and those who are ruled, for those who obey and those who disobey, or those who feel they are above any rules, because there is nothing above them. No transcendence, would it be from intellectual, spiritual, or collective, or even individual, about good and bad, right and wrong, transgression and non-transgression, obedience for the purpose of it, or obedience for the understanding that it's the ties that free the thinking, so we can be cultivated and critical at the same time as contributing to each other through education, through conversation, through display of knowledge, through imitation of trades, of thoughts, of ways of thinking, of rejecting, agreeing to disagree, which is so difficult, pacifically so, as we know, for all these millennia before us already. Not everything gets clearly stated in a debate of disagreements, previously agreed to disagree, but presenting argumentations through language, through vocabulary, through intellect. So the eloquence of a musical note chosen in the right place is the eloquence of a word that touches its target intellectually and perhaps emotionally. The syntax of music, the grammar of music, the vocabulary of music are essential. And so therefore, when we arrive on this world, not choosing when, apparently, or for how long, as much as we hope, except accidents, diseases, and horrible nastiness of humans at large scale, we survive somehow between hunger and expectation, and between surviving not only but also with a purpose that we set for ourselves according to the qualities that people see in us, or that we think we sometimes perhaps overstate our own evaluation. Though nobody is indispensable, nevertheless, for the self-esteem which is necessary to exist, we need to develop a sense of purpose for us and for the society in which we are, or the group where we evolve. Even if we're individualistic and not always collective, or not at all, or also only, whichever way the interactions happen, our being on earth for the time that we are alive brings something to others. Hopefully not only negative. Sometimes people are left with complete ignoration of your contribution to society, because it's invisibilized, it's not important. It's a way to disrupt, or perhaps a way to shut down your individual creativity at any level that it is, societal, organizational, emotional, familial, or at every level of human cells organization, between competitivity and completion, in couples, in groups, in organizations, in brotherhoods, in sisterhoods, in structured learning schools, or individual one-to-one curiosity through available information field on which we pick from the World Wide Web. But how do we build, first and foremost, an intellectual library of our general culture, from literature, philosophy, languages, music, art forms, disturbing or proving, disrupting or extending the human experience, the spiritual experience, the intellectual construction of our beings, and then developing niche knowledges that are interesting to a tiny fraction of humanity, beyond the need of distraction which the humanity seems to throw itself in between sports and pop. It's a necessary exaltation of the senses. And I understand that because I am part of this human organization of the world that seems to make no sense, because greed overtakes reason and compassion, and then top of most things anyway are not what they appear. So people retract to not even caring. And then they become egotistic, or then self-narcissistic for their own people, or for their own self, or their own pet, or their own whatever they value. Because there is a moment where you reach that inner garden of the inner world that you have constructed between the innate and the acquired. And I find that when it comes to music interpretation, it's transmission through teaching, it's evaluation through competitions, which is sort of questionable because of the lack of objective criteria. But beyond that, some people define what is the good taste of an interpretation, therefore the balance between drive, meaning, technique, expression, and what is regular and what is extra, and what is exaggerated, e fortissimo, e pianissimo, e legatissimo, e staccatissimo. All the issimo in Italian music language, music terms seem to always indicate that there is a piano and a forte, or worse or better, there is a mezzo piano and a mezzo forte. So between the middle ground and the extreme, that's why sometimes I love to write mezzo pianissimo in some scores, as if you can have a also intense whisper as well as a intense shout or scream if you write mezzo fortissimo, which is playfully a contradiction in terms. But when you see Albanese writing 4F or 4P in Iberia as a notation, you can also say it's an example of an exaggeration that wants to speak about something that goes beyond just loud and soft. It's shout and whisper, it's about, or the crescendo, the diminuendo, the subito, because after all, you can also be expressive without to change the dynamics. You can delay, separate, organize the notes through articulation, like enunciation in speech. And if you combine all these elements, plus the pedal for the piano, which is sort of special to it compared to other instruments that prolongs somehow artificially the decaying sound, you can obtain an echo of the orchestral image, which would be a colorful image, by analogy to a black and white photo image. That would be the piano with the hints through quality of voicing. That would be chiaroscuro, brightness, light, or darkness, or shadow. So you put in perspective rather than display coloristic timbres which you don't have on the piano. But so much is to do with the depth of the reflection, of the display of the notes. And it is true that it's a very subjective opinion from one teacher to another who defines for a student who seeks to know what are the boundaries or what are the non-boundaries, but usually it's for the boundaries. Is it supposed to be that soft, that loud, that fast, that slow? These very basic directions, but then it's way more subtle than that. It's the pulse, is the phrasing, is the hemiola, is the direction of the phrase, is the way the sentence is organized beyond this notational system of bar lines. So you navigate at several levels of understanding, meaning, or hinting through the notation of what you're suggested or is suggesting to the performer to do, no matter how much you give indications. At some point, the performer, the interpreter, the translator, etymologically, is brought to bring their own grain of salt in this windmill of culture, where you grind the thematic materials, the modal, the tonal, the major, the minor, whatever it is that makes it, at the first get-go, penetrate our in world, and then we start hearing more things when we listen to it again, or when we start reading it again. The innuendos, the subtleties, the secondary voices, the dubbing of this, the lack of that, the breathing here compared to there. It is not just details. Well, it is, but the way all these planets organize themselves in these allegoric plethoras of planets in giant nebulas, we hear only the result. The result is the visible part of the iceberg, is in the preparation, in the repetition, in the rehearsal, in the practicing, in the shaping of each detail, each piece of the puzzle, and how it fits smoothly in the whole, and then how you look at it in perspective. How far too far, how close too close. Therefore, how the intensity that you give to the forte, or to the mezzo forte, or the legato, or the air legato, or the wet legato, or the dry staccato, or the wet staccato, or the mezzo staccato, or the tenuto, or the portato. And every student speaks to every teacher about how to translate what they read on the printed score, which is inevitably our only portal to this mostly dead composers from past time periods, culture, centuries, places, instrumentarium, imagination, psyche, vision of the world, inspiration by spirituality and beyond, about how do we translate it simply, mundanely, daily on the piano of today. If we do a legato that is overlapping, or that is not, or that is aired, or that becomes tenuto, or portato, or perhaps a staccato that could become scratch staccato, almost ironically dry, or playfully rebounding. And if you add to this a hairpin, how much? It depends of where it goes in the phrase, what is the structure, what is the purpose, how it's organized by the organization of the notes through phrases chopped into bar lines, which you don't hear in the performance, or you shouldn't. And therefore, if you add to it a rubato, because you want to delay one that is so meaningful to the purpose of the statement, in a way a rhetorical theater teacher would say, for the conviction you have to delay or display this syllable that way or that other way, because then it takes another dimension or another direction of this same notes that can be used or becomes. In other words, it's not the notes, it's how they interact with each other and how you bring them to breathe, imagination in breathing that we don't have on the piano, or you become a bowed instrument by imagination on the piano, or become a choir by imagination. You add lyrics, I want to dance with you today. And if it helps you to phrase it instead of just playing in notes, even with the pedal, which lifting all the dampers takes away the direction of the line of the intervals, and then they become chordal, and you hear clusters, and the clusters. So we are used to hear things with resonance, or we find it too dry. It all depends of the style, if it's Scarlatti or if it's Gershwin. Obviously, it's not the same. So yes, there are rules, there are criterias that make us choose how much a piano is a pianissimo. If the opening of Waldstein is rebounding staccati or connected stated notes. And not for the purpose of it. I'm going to colorize it that way, or I prefer it that way, because at that level it would be childish in the sense of just sensorial. Okay, it's fun, it's true, but it's not necessarily meaningful beyond being prettyful. What matters is why this is delaying for 2 bars and a half, and finally at the last moment you have 5 of 5, and then you start on the subdominant, secondary subdominant of your subdominant. And all that because in few bars, you'll go on the dominant. So Beethoven is thought-provoking, starting on the tonic that leads to a dominant, starting on the secondary dominance and subdominance of the subdominant in order to establish the dominant, and doing it in different ranges and in different touches. All these are the elements that are chosen by the composer. Yeah, objectively that is fact. You open the score, you look at the notes, you learned enough music theories, solfège, year training to know what is a 16th note and how many are in a quarter note, how many quarter notes in a 4/4. Therefore, you organize it, you put it together. You're a good conductor because you think structural, and that's important when you play, because you cannot just play barless if it's not meant to be rubato. And in this opening, the statement is very clear. It goes from here to there, and then there. So now the question is, if you're going to start pianissimo, with or without pedal, with or without staccato, with or without una corda, because it can be further, muffled, dry, wet, connected, prolonged, voiced. But then you thematize something that he didn't, since he has just repeated chords for a theme, which are an accompaniment and a thematic material all in one. So if you say, I'm going to look at it as a craftsman, these are C major chords that are repeated without pedal. I play them even until Beethoven chooses to change them too. And then that's all it is. I am a good craftsman of Beethoven's music. If I try to input in it my idea of distant rumble that rises towards the dominant through the subdominant, of course, I all of a sudden over voice, over colorize, thematize, start reorchestrating, if it were, since there is no instruments on the piano in terms of timbres variety, only the shadows and lights, then therefore in the orchestration, in a symphony, if he starts with strings, he doesn't start with brass or with woodwinds. Therefore, if you change the orchestration as a conductor, you change the coloristic aspect, therefore the meaningful statement of the elements and how they're organized through the structure of the color scheme, if you want, in order to bring the purpose and the coating of the storytelling to our imagination by orchestrally bedazzling us with the colorful amount of timbres. And here on the piano, we are limited to only what the piano is, which is a piano, literally for the dynamic but range, but also for the instrument. After all, it's called after that. But it's also a forte. So to which extent are we brought to excessively for the eyes of those who prefer it to be normative? And they place the cursor where is the norm, therefore where is your excess? The staccato staccatissimo, the forte fortissimo, as I said earlier. Is it because of a character expression that you want to sort of end up, in the eyes of purists, caricaturing the statement by overstating it in all its aspects? The thinner is too thin, the thicker is too thick, the dark is too dark, the brighter is too bright. And the cursor for this normality of the irregular sound, the moderato, is the true question, where you place it. If a pianist is attracted by the quality of the tone for everything, the screeching fortissimo, or the intensely emotional whispered, then you could argue that in an acoustical room with decent amount of people who would have come to hear you, if you perform, then the mezzo pianissimi become mezzo piano, the fortissimi become forte. So the spectrum becomes a little less large, less wide in the vertical dynamic range space. But then you gain things in terms of articulation. Air legato or legato, with or without pedal. And then you interact with the acoustics, the resonance of the whole, the piano that interacts differently with the different acoustics. The sound rebounds and comes back to you. Do you take into account, or do you just play as you practice, no matter where, but preferably most of the time factually more than preferably, not in the concert hall. So you acquire the muscular memory for the performance of every detail on a random instrument somewhere in some, most of the time, small room that has no resonance. So do you take it in account when you play? Can you change something to the muscular memory, mnemotechnic organization of the thoughts? No, I don't think so. I think once this organization is going on with managing the shiftings, the levels, the dynamics, if you have a melody and accompaniment, you follow the melody, the suspended melodic line that needs substitutions in order to, that's very Schubertian pattern, the accompaniment. You cannot at one point decide, I'm going to take out a little bit of this, I'm going to add more of this. I don't think we can do that. It's not like a domino where you take this piece and then you add that piece, and sometimes when you do that, the whole thing falls. Generally, a pianist practices not where they perform, or not on the instrument on which they'll perform. So it's sort of a arranged marriage where you meet your spouse on the altar. It's when you arrive to perform a piece you practiced for weeks, months, years, or through a lifetime of being around this piece off and on until you hope one day to really reach the dimension that it represents for you, for music world, for everything that it means to you. And you're carving it like a craftsman, and you're constructing it as a spiritual guide, and you're your conductor in your orchestra, and you know how you want to go through the sections in the ideal path of the storytelling, and then life happens and it doesn't go the way you planned. The instrument this, the acoustic that, the tiredness this section that the fingering didn't work, or accidentally you went to another fingering and it didn't work and didn't repeat, another played too loud. All of a sudden the balance of the detailed, of the subtleties that are organized to sort of appear just breaks down, and the audience doesn't know how much you're disappointed from the result compared to the expectation, which is in your inner ear, inner world, inner imagination, from repetitivity of projecting yourself into the performance, learning every detail until organizing to play the whole piece. In other words, from the micro or nano to the macro, all in one, and you just have one chance to tell it. And it better work through the transitions, the sections, the technical aspects, the way you negotiate the ritenuto into the second theme if it's slower, or if it shouldn't be, or if it gives the illusion to be, and then how you organize the repeated notes. Are they melodic? Are they rhythmic? Are they pulsed? Are they replayed within the resonance? How much the piano action responds, how it's uneven, and some notes respond other ways as than the way you planned. So you don't practice on the instrument you'll play, and you don't play in the acoustics in which you practice. In other words, it's an experience of its own, no matter how much you rehearsed it in playing it through here and there. And mostly is also because of the audience, or because of the jury if the audience is professional. In other words, it's they have the mirror, so you fear their judgment as well as you hope for their enthused, honest, hopefully appreciation. But of what and how much do they detect the inner voices, the secondary voices, or the exaggeration or the choice not to bring too much? Ultimately, the criteria of each listener's hearing, knowing the piece, not knowing the piece, being professional, being there to judge, or being there to enjoy, or being there to be critical, and all In fact, everybody is critical. And you are yourself, as a performer, critical to yourself, not only the teacher. So it ends up by being the product of avoidances. I want to avoid too slow. I want to avoid too loud. I want to avoid to have a hole in this section where the accompaniment is prone to this, because Schubert writes repeated notes or Schumann writes dotted rhythms, and then there are shiftings that are scary. Some are risky, some you plan, but then it delays you, the melodic line. So between the pragmatic and the spontaneous, the calculated and the organized, you have to find that equation. Just like earlier when I said music has to express itself at its fullest, the psychology of life, as well as you tend to search always for the coherence of the balance of the structural medium rare interpretation, where you either disconnect yourself from the musical meaning just to play the gymnastics of the playing, the industry of the performance, and then it becomes, when you play a fugue by Bach, you already enter in a reflection. Whenever here is a reaction. So the wrong note is a wrong note is a fear on the surface. Yes, it might be wrong, it might be too loud or not speaking. In any aspect, the note has to be right in its dynamic range. Of course, not pitch, because we don't have this luxury on the piano. It's already tuned for us. So therefore, it's about the level of impact within the structure, the section, the phrasing, the larger picture of the section. In other words, the conductor doesn't play but imagines, and therefore plans and suggests, but doesn't do. And the orchestra musicians individually don't see the big picture. They are all the details. They are all the notes. And they have to bring their vibrato and their pitch and their intonation and their imagination and their culture of sound and their education about how to play this solo or how to participate in this trio or quartet, four horns, if not four horns, it would be woodwind trio, or would be dubbing of clarinet with the strings. And so the conductor manages the balances. The orchestration already predisposes for them by the composer, who chose ahead of time what will be and how it will be balanced or heard. And then the conductor can moderate that to a certain extent. So there is a room for molding the effects, but sculpting the structure. And so is the case for the voicing on the piano. But then somebody will say, you did too much, or you didn't do enough of colors, of legato, of articulation. Your tempo was fluctuating, not enough, too much rubato, and shouldn't there be a rubato, or it shouldn't have rubato. And then everybody builds up in their knowledge of music a stylistic system of boundaries, where they say the trill, the mordent, the unmeasured marked grace note is played that way in the Baroque, that way after the Baroque, and we define when is the Baroque. In other words, yes, we do give to the students a lot of guidelines that they will break, either because their intuition is stronger by the innate than the acquired, either because the acquired fills in something that is not strong enough in the innate, and they come to seek to know because they want to do right. Why? Because they want to be accepted in the musical world by the jury's auditions for a job, for an experience of a capacity to hope for a career. In other words, then you enter in that norm that is expected of you. You have to fit in it, and then emerge out of it with some personality in the piece itself, which is already very strongly personal. The way you accompany it, or you enhance it, or you hold back from over expressing it. I'm purposely stating all these elements because I find that in a split second we form a judgment about how we liked it to be compared to what we hear it's being played, regardless of how we can or not play it, regardless. That is, musicologists don't always play, though some do. Performers don't always musicologize, but some do. Composers don't play, but some do. Pianists don't compose, but some do. But in any case, most of the time, the pianists play and the musicologists think, the composers compose, the judges judge, the criteria are subjective, objective, acquired, innate, traditions, layers of traditions, recordings, editions, publishers, gurus who define how to play Scriabin or how not to play Scriabin. And in front of such plethora of information fields, it's normal that a student who doesn't have a very strong innate drive, or if it doesn't have the character to impose it, because it's not fun to knowingly swim against the tide, will become searching through obedience to enter in a norm through which to emerge, paradoxically, is acceptable. Through this edition's suggestions and this publisher's suggestions. And they don't have naturally the time, or they could, but they don't have it, or they don't have the curiosity to search if there are various manuscripts for which to compare. And even composers themselves don't always see their own mistakes in the notation, let less imagine why they write displays that cannot be reached, but that are imagined because of the structural resonance of some stretched dispositions. Schumann, Scriabin, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, of course, some like him had very large hands, but others didn't. And nevertheless composed things even before middle pedal was invented to hold separately something and not blurry with what else you can organize to hold. In other words, multiply the fingers on the keys with their resonances, defeat the decay, which is the purpose for most pianists, or be in the denial of defeating the decay of the tone, since we cannot have a vibrato to enhance the sound when it becomes a suspension, tension, release, because musically it does, but sound-wise it doesn't. So it impacts the tempo, which is not limited by bow and breath, because after all, the instrument on the piano with the pedal can artificially stretch the tempi that then don't have the same coherence for the phrase structure of the purpose of the line of the direction. So yes, you have to find ways to define your experience by performing yourself and say to the student, I have tried this, didn't work. I tried that, I hoped it would work. But in fact, it backfired on me, either because I was rejected from this jury, or I was rejected from this job, or then you don't say any of that, but you know it. And you say, okay, they are coming into the piece now, and I've been with the piece for the last 5 decades in different ways, performing, teaching, recording, writing. And they still bring me something I didn't think about it. It could be. It's an aspect, it can be a detail. And so the choice of everything, if he is an opinionated student, the teachers are disturbed. I have some and I enjoy them, even if I think it's healthy to try to convince them rather than to impose, as asymmetrically many teachers do. I think it's through example, but of course that is easy to say, difficult to do. You have to practice every piece you teach. Or then through a balanced approach of saying these are the things that you have to cherish in this texture of this style of this piece for this instrument. The way it came to us through this notation could be a bottle in the ocean with a message in it, and that's the few notes that are written. Regardless how detailed, they will always have room for either the expected freedom that within the time period performers knew how to do, that outside of it we assume how they did, but we don't really know, especially the grace note trills, appoggiaturas, mordents. Beyond this instrument that's changed, the ears have changed, the pitch has changed, the vibration of the music has changed, the way music speaks to our soul through the vibrations chosen in a given tonality that brings us, impacts us in a way that we don't realize, because after all, if it were in another key, it might impact us differently. And is it because we are used to it, because we know it, or is it because it really is something to do with like in music therapy, the vibration, the waves of the sounds that reach you at some point and that touch you. And like something beautiful makes you cry because you know it's rare. Something truthful makes you perhaps emotional because you realize how it's rare. Something beautiful and good without any retribution for the sake of it moves you because you know it's very rare. Therefore, the reading of a score of music through the performance of the performer, filtered by their studies, pendulum swinging from too fast to too slow, to too loud, to too soft, to too much, not enough, or the why at all. And then which repertoire we play, and which are the main composers that we're supposed to play for our instrument, given fact piano has been an instrument for which most composers wrote compared to other instruments in vast amounts. We still have these enormous territories of lesser known composers, or forgotten, or in the shadows for good or bad reasons, according to each subjective point of view. You can champion some, like I do, for J.C. Bach, or for instance, Gabriel Dupont. But beyond championing this, there are plethora to be championed. And it's not only niche repertoires, though they are today. They might have been less in their own time niche, perhaps also because of the accumulation of repertoires that makes the preceding not as relevant. Because after all, around each composer who is most famous today for the repertoire that we play is this nebula of amount of composers who composed in the same time period, perhaps similar tools, using similar intervals, similar genres, and the dance and the singing and the suite of dances and the music for praying and the music for reflecting and the music for dancing, music for entertaining, music for just background. At all levels, from Satie to a Bach fugue, music brings you an inner world, like you like to listen to jazz or you like to listen to pop, and not necessarily at every different time of your life, since music today is easily available in pre-cooked boxes that you just display. Until the 19th century, in order to hear it, you had to learn it, how to play it, or somebody had to play it for you. And therefore, it was more rare, not more rare, it was very rare. And a lot of the music, to start with our famous greatest Bach in our hierarchy, was totally forgotten. So if he was, let less for the less known composers who already were not the first fiddle in their time. But again, history leaves us with these hierarchies of composers, hierarchy of works. Who is more important? Who is innovative? Who is behind his time, like Brahms compared to Debussy or Rachmaninoff compared to Schoenberg? Yes, you can say that some are progressive and some are regressive or never progressed or never adopted that progress. The atonality, the serial, the microtonal, the bitonal, the electronic, the everything else. But if all these are languages, if all these are the idioms to translate the story of our lives, the soundtrack of our psychological beings, it enhances them when we watch a film or play a game because the music is there, unnoticeably so, to enhance our psychological, emotional storytelling understanding. If you read a book silently, you don't hear the music. Or you hear a music that germs inside you, perhaps even more beautiful than any music by the greater composers, or the lesser known ones as well. Therefore, I find that it's essential to bring to belief that we have to express ourselves to the fullest. And if you make the choice to be in the middle of the expression range, then it is your chosen frame. You frame a painting of a landscape, but you don't frame the landscape. You only frame it from the wall on which you might place it. Though you could very well make it so that it blends with the wall without the frame. So it's sort of infinite spilling or concentrated into it. But when you have a frame, the frame, if it's too elaborate, might distract you from the paintings itself. And so an interpretation overstating the different aspects that you think are essential to you, or you're told that they should be, or whichever reason brings you to display the way you do, is to do with the fact that you have a conviction. You're driven by your emotion, your intellect, your education, but mostly your conviction. I choose to play this piece because I like it that way. And even if I might disagree with myself later, perhaps, or perhaps not, I want to bring this temporary fixing of my ideas about the piece to play it at its best. That's why so many are disappointed the way they played, because of the fact that things don't go the way they are planned, because of the acoustics instruments and all these aleatoric situations. Then yes, Gould gave up playing concerts because of that, only recordings. But that was a drastic choice other artists didn't do. They accept the unexpected. And with experience, they deal with the unexpected, perhaps overly formatting it in order not to be vulnerable to it, and then less expressive, perhaps, or to some rightly expressive. Again, it's the eye of the beholder or the ear of the listener, the intellect of the person who hears, who defines. This is too much, not enough. But ultimately, we need to bring ourselves to serve with our conviction and learn the technique to express our conviction, not to be betrayed by our technique, to count on it. The good fingering, the good phrasing, the good shaping, the good way that your individual hand will shape this written by somebody else, not thinking of your hand, management of the arpeggio patterns, chord, scale, anything, um, is how you bring it to be through your individuality, from the physical aspect that makes you have a reliable technique by practicing every detail, like rivet by rivet, until you build the structure. And then the structure itself, you don't see the rivets, but you only see the structure. And then you see the wind, and then you see the sun, and then you see the rain, and then you see how the structure holds at sunset or at sunrise. So this is harmonization, pedaling, tempo. You can have rubato, and to a certain extent, you do it perhaps unwillingly, even if you practice with the metronome until you are able to count independently from your playing, if it's legato, staccato, singing or not, to be your objective conductor with your subjective orchestra musicians and your intellectual knowledge of the score. I mean, between learning a piece, owning the piece in the sense of understanding all its implications and how you're going to put it together, bring it and serve it, is like a cooking show where you have the ingredients, you have the cookbook, and then you have the finished product, and then you eat it. And then you say, it's not enough of this, too much of that. I rather you have stayed longer in this and that, or you should have heated it to this level. Same thing about knowledgeable wine tasting for those who do. Knowledgeable palate about foods, knowledgeable ear, awareness of subtleties, what I didn't hear, what I wish to hear, or when I hear it, I appreciate it, or when I don't know that I am supposed to hear it, or I'm not supposed to not hear it, how do I know I miss it? And that's when the legato is not fully legato by finger, but it's by pedal. Then inevitably, if I think it's okay because it doesn't matter to me as a listener, I accept it, then you start refining your judgment, because you start comparing the ways people display the same notes. You don't know why if you don't have the knowledge, because nobody's omniscient, or shouldn't be if geniuses might. But generally, we learn by curiosity and comparison, and then by our approach or what it means to us. Again, like in the beginning when I said some things oppose us or some things that makes us attract to it. And so if it's that much of a rejection, it's almost also love. But if it's completely moderato, doesn't matter, just stay in the middle range of the expression. If it's a meaningful purpose for that structural moment of the piece or section of it, absolutely yes. But if it's to retrieve yourself and say, I'm going to just play it gymnastically correct so I'm reliable and have all the notes in the right spots, even if they don't construct a phrase, the legato is not really finger legato, but it's okay, the pedal will supply to it. The acoustics makes us believe it's not cheating, but you have the illusion that it is a finger legato, but you don't have the finger substitutions that put your hand in lack of balance, so you take more risks unless you practice towards them. It's all about calculated risk-taking through practicing all this. And that's where the teacher comes in, like an insurer who tells you drive safely, rather than a salesman of a race car who says it's going to be cool to drive fast. Because you have to be in the environment with the other cars and with your own car and know how fast it will brake. So you have to organize yourself. Thankfully, a wrong note on the piano is not an accident where you can die or be injured for life. But choices have to be made, like conductors do before the orchestra musicians execute them, agreeing to disagree or just obeying because they're paid, respecting or not, paid or not. Not every orchestra musician respects every conductor, far from there. And how do you impose yourself? Through your musicianship, your philosophy, your humanity, your way to translate your musical understanding of the piece by trusting the musicians instead of imposing only on them, But you have to have a drive that is followed by all the performers in the orchestra, because the ultimate purpose is to play the product, is to play the opera, the symphony, the oratorio. It's to be the oratorio, to be the symphony, to be the moment that exalts or restrains the expression of the humanity in it. So the level of involvement has to correspond to the style, and the definition of it has to be done by, I would say, common sense, because ultimately, as I said, if you have a deep conviction and then everybody tells you that is wrong in the field in which you want to be accepted, possibly liked, if not respected, then you feel like you're doing the wrong thing in the wrong place. But perhaps ultimately you are right, once against all the others. That would be like people speak of Glenn Gould's interpretation. They're so auspicious, so personal, so unlike anything else then and since. On the other side, you say, I can recognize his performance as soon as I open the device that plays or streams or broadcasts. Yeah, so this fact of recognizing, does it justify the choices? Perhaps it's just an over-definition of his personality over the piece itself. We are here to humbly serve the music and therefore to serve the text, and therefore through the text, the intent of the composer, and through the notation of the publisher's edition, understand what is the level of the intent versus the level of the interpretation that we put over it. Oh, this modulation is tragic. Oh, this modulation is magic. Oh, this moment is heaven. This is smile. This is sad. Yes, we can put these words because it helps us. It helps us navigate. And sometimes it's so enigmatic we don't understand what's going on. Where is the phrase ending? Why is this chord tense and dissonant going to another chord that is tense and dissonant? If we're not used or not learning or not attuned to the language of a given composer, then we are lost in translation. We don't just do sounds for sounds. We do sounds for meaning, at least what it means to us. Thank you very much.